All right. Next, we have the Campside Chat with Erica and Adrian. Welcome to the stage. With really intense outfits, I gotta say.
It was intentional.
Yes, this is totally
Okay,
planned.
make yourself comfortable.
Yeah, as soon as I found out I'm, drinking with Adrian, I was like, match with red.
Cool.
All right.
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Erica, founder of KryptoSeoul. I host a ton of events like this as well, but Anoma has been with me since the beginning, so I'm a good friend of Anoma with good intents. Really happy to be a part of the discussion. Adrian's a great friend of mine, but we go way back. 2017, is it?
We're old now.
And the theme of this, Campside Fireside Chat is kind of like knowing about the founding story, about the story of Anoma, how it began. And I'm curious, honestly, because I've seen you back when you were, at Cosmos and kind of like doing the whole. Yeah, and so really curious how it all began with the co-founders. Like how did the discussion begin, and also with the Anoma name. I'm also curious about that as well. Can you run through the foundation story with us?
Yeah. So Anoma started, I think, officially in the middle of 2020. Because sort of Chris and I sat down, it's like we were very depressed about the state of things. And the state of things was always, let's copy this EVM Solidity contract to yet another chain and somehow call this progress in terms of what we fundamentally sort of like the systems we're fundamentally building, right? And so this was the state in 2020, and so we thought, okay, if we keep going down this route, this is not going to be all that useful long term. Like my parents will never want to use this kind of stuff. And so we ended up thinking about Anoma, and Chris had come from this background. He built Wyvern, the backend to OpenSea, which is the single largest gas user on Ethereum. And sort of we thought about a couple of things, which is, A, users don't have transactions, generally speaking. Users have transactions in the Bitcoin world where like you go to a store and you give someone Bitcoin in exchange for milk. But generally speaking, most users nowadays have intents. I have A for B and I need to figure out someone else that has either the inverse or that I can coordinate with, right? So sort of intents was the first key cornerstone. And then around intents, how do you make decentralized coordination actually work? So like how do you gossip these intents around? How do you allow counterparty discovery, decentralized counterparty discovery? How do you build solving into this? So this was really sort of the origin here on like, everyone is going to have intents. Like everyone has partial things that they want to coordinate around. Like I want to trade A for B kind of thing. How do we actually make this decentralized and usable in practice where it's also composable? Because one of the really weird things we saw back in the day, which is still true today, which is if I'm interacting with DEX 1 and you're interacting with DEX 2, we now split our liquidity. Like we split the state across these two things. And as a user, I don't really care. I don't want to have to pick the specific application that I interact with. I just want to pick, I care about getting A for B, right? This was sort of the first part of Anoma. And the second part was, I think long term we always thought that information flow control, the ability to not reveal the entire state, was going to be very important. Because my parents, again, like they don't want that their neighbors know how much like they pay in a pharmacy or how much they receive in terms of salary, right? And so like I think for the real world, this kind of granular information flow control where users decide what they want to reveal and to whom was going to be critical. That's roughly sort of like how Anoma started, and that was middle of 2020. We wrote the original white paper, which was really focused around coordination. That's sort of the background there. How we got to Anoma, lots of hard work. We wrote down like 1,000 names. And then we picked. And we just kept writing down names until we found one that we liked. That wasn't taken, that wasn't sort of connotated with something else. That was easy to pronounce, so we tried this in different languages. It was a very deliberate, long-term design process on like, what is easy to pronounce by most of the world? And so we went around like, how do you spell Anoma? And no one managed to sort of misspell this in obvious ways. And then we also went around like, read this? How would you say this? This is the,
So less meaning, but more of a pronunciation kind of, and
Yes.
sticking to the various regions. And for Koreans, it's actually very easy, straightforward to, write down and pronounce. So
yeah. So if you're looking for names, write things down, right? Like 1,000 names and then start iterating on it.
it's kind of like finding baby names, like me.
Yeah. Other things here. You
Good
want,
baby name, actually.
Yes, you don't want to be too long. And you want to be early in the alphabet, ideally.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. So it's a very like intuitive name finding process.
I can give you my entire thesis on how to pick names after this.
Okay.
But there's a process to the madness.
Good advice for. Okay. Well, I think when I explained, because Anoma was everywhere in Middle Asia, and my conference is in Korea. So, but the impression that people get is it is difficult. Like the content is pretty complicated, right? I mean, it's a lot of technical jargon, right? Intense. I think now it's becoming very. I don't know. It's hyped up. I think it's a lot of good vibes there, but it's just kind of let's dumb it down for people as well. Like for 10-year-old, pretend I'm a 10-year-old, right? Explain to
I
me.
can start, and maybe this is not, it's dumbed down for Anoma, maybe not yet dumbed down to the 10-year-old, but we're getting there. Anoma fundamentally it's an intent-centric distributed operating system. You can think of this as Anoma is an operating system that can run on many different CPUs. And like when you start looking at these blockchains as specific CPUs, we're currently living in this world where every developer builds applications against specific CPUs. This is sort of, we lived in this world prior to, I think, the mainstream adoption of Windows, really, where people like build against specific CPUs. And Anoma is really the first time that we have a distributed operating system that applications can roam between many different CPUs, so you don't have to rebuild your application against sort of if there's a new CPU, new execution environment coming up. And B, since a lot of these CPUs tend to be blockchains that tend to be networked with each other, it's a distributed thing that gives you certain distributed systems guarantees. I think this is sort of the easiest way, I think, not for a 10-year-old, but someone that sort of interacts a lot, or interacts a little bit with technology to start getting a good mental model of what Anoma is. It's an intent-centric distributed operating system. How I'd explain intense is intense.
In your definition, intense.
Yeah.
I mean, many people have different definitions, right?
Intense are partial state updates.
Partial state updates.
Yes, they describe what you want, not how you get it. They describe, I want candy, but I do not care. Like, actually, this is how probably 5 or 10-year-olds interact with their parents. I want candy. Yeah. I do not care whether it comes from Aldi, Lidl, or Migros, right? Like, this is sort of like the basic definition of an intent, where you do not specify how to get something, you specify what you want. And then sort of the hard problem of how the actual execution should look like, that's fully outsourced to solvers. The nice thing is this maps really well into everything from basic trading examples, like fundamentally all trades are intents, but not all intents are trades, but not all trades are intents, kind of thing. Like it's a subset. But so this maps are from the trading examples all the way to I want to be part of a multi-sig. Like when you use Gnosis Safe, really like I have a partial signature, you have a partial signature, and someone else has a partial signature. They're not executable on chain. They're just like intents. Only when you combine all these 3 partial signatures together do you actually have something that you can execute on chain. This is intents are partial state updates. They're not just limit orders. Yeah.
I think intense, it's easy for a 10-year-old to understand in a way. Like, on Lollipop.
Yeah, we should keep using that example.
Yeah, you should keep using that
Just
example.
getting a candy.
Because I think,
don't care from which store.
I think intense is definitely a good keyword for people to understand Anoma, like from a newbie perspective, non-technical perspective as well. Why? So, okay, maybe coming from in Asia, so I'm Korean, right? And honestly, I think Asian continent, Koreans don't really care much about privacy in general. I mean, sorry to be generalizing, but it's kind of true. Like about data, like our personal data is everywhere. We're kind of like immune to it. We're like, oh, it's fine. As long as it's convenient, it's, So kind of, can you like emphasize like why it's important and how Anoma can help contribute to that?
Yeah, I would actually say that so intents lend themselves really well towards sort of these privacy preserving applications because they model the behavior of I want I have a partial thing, so I can generate my partial zero knowledge, like I can generate zero knowledge proof over my partial state update, over my intent. So for example, if you, want to do a trade, if you do not have intents, we just need to send all our sort of state updates to a central solver, where the central solver then generates the entire proof. With intents, I can sort of do my partial proof, you do your partial proof, and then someone else can just do the rollup proof to combine all these different zero knowledge proofs into something that's actually executable. So in that sense, so the technical abstraction of intents lends itself super well towards anything that's privacy preserving. I agree though, like privacy is going to be it's something that the architecture supports. It is not something that individual end users fundamentally care about. Like if it's convenient to use this, they will probably opt into it, but they're not going to fundamentally switch to something that's like a lot less convenient to use, right? And so I think as a whole, like intents are just probably an order of magnitude more composable, both in terms of because you don't have to specify specific applications that you're interacting with via transactions, as well as they're also just composable across many different blockchains, so like across many different execution environments. So I think really the drive here is that intents are like an order of magnitude improvement over sort of just raw transactions, and this is the drive why people will care about it. And then we sort of get the information flow privacy guarantees, just like as a nice add-on. As we get more and more mainstream adoption, people can start opting into it. Like in Anoma, really like whether you specify the difference on whether you use information flow control or not is the difference to do you provide a plain text signature over your state update, or do you attach a proof to it? That's it. And like at some point, as more and more people start using intents, they can just start switching towards generating proofs rather than plain text signatures.
Yes. We're trying to dumb it down, Adrian.
Sorry.
We're trying to simplify, yeah, I think it'll be helpful if you know.
I think long-term for privacy, why you should care about it is for national defense. I think of privacy guarantees as privacy for national defense. That it's a bad idea that you leak your data to someone that starts collecting this. So this is why, like, I think as governments, like, you really fundamentally need to start caring about, like, or as communities, you need to care where does your community's data leak to. Because data is some of the most fundamental, sort of most valuable real estate or assets that you have. And I think over time, especially in a multipolar world order, like people need to start individually caring more because this data can be easily abused. So this is why I think the sort of information flow control is really going to matter long term.
Just curious about, like, do you have a personal reason why you care about privacy and?
Yeah, I think personally I'm pretty worried that our existing systems aren't going to survive like the initial day of World War III, because a lot of these systems will just go away. And I think like these data troves that we're creating right now are just going to be harvested, not for your benefit, but for your detriment. Like right now we're still living in this happy world where like mostly our data is used for good things, but I think that's going to change. And I think we want to have technology that's ready for this case.
Thank you for sharing. When you were founding, well, you just said with the right paper in 2020, right? Since then, it's been 3 years. Let's kind of talk about the trajectory there, processes. I'm sure it wasn't easy. Maybe can you share some of the challenges that you had on the way, and maybe like one thing that just pops into your head, what was really hard being a founder as well, right?
Yeah, so it is very difficult if you are, it is much easier to build within existing paradigms. Like if you just follow sort of like the current wave, it is much easier to explain to people. I think this was always a challenge, and this is something that we're overcoming over time, but like Anoma really is like, it's a fundamental innovation. It's like, I really look at this, like we had Bitcoin with scriptable settlement, we have Ethereum with programmable settlement, and sort of Anoma's sort of like decentralized counterparty discovery and distributed solving. This is sort of like, it's an evolution, it's a paradigm shift here. And I think as a founder, if you're building something like this, you're doing a lot more legwork to explain this to people because they don't know what you're talking about. Like when we started talking about intents in 2020, everyone's like, what are intents? And so you just have to do a lot more on the ground education. And to some extent, you also have to find the right terms to use, right? Like we explained Anoma very differently in the beginning, but as we got a better understanding of sort of like what is easy for people to grasp, it just becomes easier now over time. So I think this is probably, I think fundamentally as a founder, you have the choice. Do you build within existing paradigms? Then I think you can do less things, and maybe you can't be as innovative, like you can't push the space forward as much. But it's going to be much easier to explain to people. Or do you try to like tackle the really hard problems, but that provide a lot of upside if you solve them correctly?
Yeah, no, I think it's a common problem in crypto in general. I mean, to kind of also be more mass-facing as well, to explain it well to, 10-year-old, right? I mean, or just like a normie, should I say? People like me, who are not very technical, but want to understand why it's important, why we should use it, and stuff like that. So it's a very common dilemma, but also it's branding is also very important as well. And I think you guys are doing an amazing job recently. I mean, it's going really well. Let's see, what kind of I was thinking of like some fun questions as well. There are other co-founders as well. Are there any roles that did you distribute when you were like founding it together? Did you have any distinct roles within the co-founders as well? And if so, how did you?
Yeah, I think we have a fairly broad set of backgrounds. I mean, our came from a chain analysis background. It's like all the data gathering, right? And like actually seeing the flip side of like what does it mean that everything is public all the time. And Chris came from this background of building the backend, building something called the Wyvern protocol, right? So like really interacting deeply with the Ethereum community. And so I think we really have very complementary skill sets. I wouldn't say that they're necessarily like hard splits. I think everyone likes to get involved sometimes when they feel it's necessary. Yeah, this is the way I'm thinking about this. So like no necessarily hard splits, but rather how do you how does your individual background relate to what you're doing, and how can you push this forward as much as you can?
Yeah, and I think also in crypto as well, but in usability is also a very big issue. It's important to the founders and to us, but how are we gonna, have companies using it or other, projects using it, right? What is your tactic these days, or what are you guys' tactic to, solve this? And what are you trying right now?
Yeah, I think with Anoma, it's actually very clear nowadays. I think we spent probably a good 2 years very much in a bubble on like, how do we solve these things from first principles, right? And I think this was actually very, very important because you really need to understand the problem deeply. Once you understand the problem deeply, you can actually start thinking of how these are the right solutions for the problem that we're actually clearly seeing. And I think not enough people actually do this, where they're trying to understand the actual problem space at a very fundamental level, right? And so I think we sort of took about 2 years or so, sort of just like thinking about the hard questions really deeply. But now it's very clear, which is Anoma is something that's incredibly compatible with every existing ecosystem, right? Like you can run Anoma on Ethereum because fundamentally it's a user choice whether users want to use Ethereum state and Ethereum security. Anoma really, it's an abstraction on top that makes everyone, the developers' lives easier to start building intent-centric applications that can run on Ethereum. And again, this can also mean that the intent-centric, that Anoma can run on something like Neo, something like Solana, right? Like you can deploy the operating system really to many different places because this fundamentally comes from our thesis that you want to have a homogeneous architecture, but you want to have heterogeneous trust models, right? I think this is sort of where we really come from, or where we see the world going. It's like there's not going to be the single global security model. There's not everyone is going to checkpoint to Bitcoin. I think, the Bitcoiners try to some extent to convince everyone to checkpoint to Bitcoin, right? But when you think about this structurally, this is not the world we currently live in, and so Anoma isn't designed for this kind of computer science made up world of we want to have a single global security model. Anoma is designed for this world where many different individuals have many different security preferences, and I can totally see that a large majority of us will, including me, will have the security preference of yes, I'd like to be settled to Ethereum eventually, so I'd like to be able to use Anoma on Ethereum, but this may not apply to someone like my parents who I cannot build a system that's decentralized enough for my parents to trust it. There's my parents will want local governance over their local system. They do not want to outsource their security to some global thing that they do not understand. They want to trust that the sort of 2,000 people in their village to run their financial system, I think. Because this is fundamentally where the social trust lies anyway, right? And so I think we want to be designing these systems that are really flexible in terms of the actual topology that they're deployed in, like where my parents make a different choice, but they can still be composable with my choice when I'm on Ethereum. This is sort of like one way I think about this, yeah.
Nice. So when people ask, oh, what is the use case for Anoma? Like, what would be a clean answer? Like one simple example that you usually give to people?
Yes, this example is fully driven by what blockchains are currently used for. Like, blockchains are only used for financial stuff. This is sort of, it's just the reality we live in right now. Like 99% of all valuable state on these systems is financial in nature, right? And so Anoma really is, it's not a specific application, so it's like, what can developers build more easily using Anoma, sort of within the sort of existing ecosystem, which is all financial applications. So I think sort of the large use case here is within the financial realm, and I think from the thing that I'm most excited about is a composable DEX, effectively privacy-preserving DEX, where individual users have intents. They may be running through many different front ends, but all this like front end liquidity is like it's fully aggregated, right? Like to some extent, Anoma, what Anoma does, it does state defragmentation, which is rather than locking state in individual specific applications, it allows users to express their intents, and then this may be settled against CowSwap, this may be settled against Uniswap. This is not something that the user needs to care about. So I think sort of this is, to me, a privacy-preserving DEX that is truly composable. Is I think the first very cool application that I'd like to see. Because it's also now the people that don't want to trade privately and the people that want to trade transparently can do so at the same time without having to fragment the liquidity between these things. So this is like one example. I think a lot about, I think the other thing that I'd like to see that's non-financial in nature is public signal. It's the inverse to Kickstarter. It's the ability for users to sort of write their intents and like, oh, I would like to see this road cleaned up, and I'm willing to pay $5 for this. If enough people get together, someone can sort of issue the inverse intent, which is, well, I'll take the $500 and I clean up the road, and this is only settable if the road is actually cleaned up, right? So, but now users and individuals can much more direct what they would like to see happen in the world, rather than someone going, well, let me clean the road and then like start charging people for it.
Okay. Well, thank you for the example. I know we talked about founding story, and this, is specifically about the origin, but I would like to kind of talk about also the horizon, next horizon for Anoma. It's a long project, it's a long-term process to, endure as a founder and kind of, pave the way. But how do you see Anoma going, and as for you too, in the next year, but also short-term and long-term? I'd like to hear both, if that's same or different. Maybe more specific in the short term,
yeah.
More vague in the longer term, I guess.
So I'm very excited for this year. We're targeting the first Anoma testnets this summer, targeting mainnet towards Q4, so the first deployments of Anoma starting to actually be in the real world. I think the timing is very nice because right now everyone is like talking, like intents are clearly a thing, right? Like everyone is starting to understand that intents are the correct abstractions to be using. And no one has any good generalized infrastructure for this. Like it just doesn't exist. So I think the timing here is perfect because everyone is thinking, I would like to build this application using intents, and Anoma is the only infrastructure that can actually support these kind of application or like developer desires to some extent. So I think this is what I'm super excited for this year. Also growing the community. I mean, there are going to be some cool announcements later in terms of how you can get involved. So I think this year is going to be packed on just like shipping a lot of these things. Long term, I think a lot of the fundamental research is figured out and is in the process of being implemented. And Anoma was designed to be incredibly modular, so you can like swap out different cryptography systems. If sort of later, like if in 2 years we find a better zero-knowledge proof system, we can swap this out quite easily. So I think long term, thinking about like how do we actually get different topologies of Anoma deployed? How do we have this really? In this industry, we tend to call this the multi-chain deployments, but more like thinking in the real world. How do we get individual communities to run their own sovereign infrastructure that is still composable with the rest of the ecosystem? And this sort of applies to Ethereum, near Solana, like having a sovereign infrastructure on those systems that can compose, but also having like my local Anoma instance running in my city of Zug, and sort of getting composability that way. Because I think, yeah, this is really what I like to see long term. Because to me, this is the only actual way to build really resilient systems, is to have too many systems that can compose with each other, but that aren't necessarily fundamentally tied to each other.
Speaking of Zook, I wanted to ask a question. Last kind of fun question, but I know you've been a proponent of Switzerland in general. You've been asking me to, like, Awa as well, to move to Switzerland for many years. Just curious what your thoughts are in Switzerland. Can you just kind of because I know.
Yeah, so I am a pretty big proponent of Switzerland because I think they have a well-working system in the way the system is set up. It's a sort of, you can think of this as cantons are just incredibly autonomous, and you can make reasonable local choices, and you have competition between all the 26 different cantons. As a result, you get way more innovation on the sort of the governance side and like what policy should look like than I've seen in any other system. The other thing is people are close to their democracy. In 2 cantons, they still vote in the public square via hand signal, which is a really good thing because, I mean, there's some downsides that shouldn't be overlooked, but fundamentally, you feel close to the democracy. You feel close to the system that you're living in. And I think this is a very important feature when you think, so like, to me, Switzerland is like the ideal embodiment of like how blockchain should be structured to a large extent, because you want to have many sovereign systems that are still sort of like, they can decide how much they want to interact with each other and how much they want to have shared security guarantees, for example, right? So this is sort of one component of like, maybe your like fundamental security model is going to be something like Ethereum, and you then want to have something that's composable, like that is checkpoint in this security model, but maybe also you want to just be fully sovereign. So I think this is why I'm a big fan of Switzerland. And like overall, I've traveled a bunch, and it's like Switzerland is like the only reasonable working governance system that I've seen so far. Because it's small, I don't think governance systems scale fundamentally like on sort of like human governance systems don't scale much beyond, like countries do not scale beyond 10 million people, because at some point you're just too far removed from the people that govern you. Like I moved to Switzerland 6.5 years ago, and I am at most 2 connections away from the current sort of executive branch of Switzerland, right? Like just think about this in terms of the US or in terms of even Germany where I'm from. You want to be close to sort of the governance systems that you have to interact with, and as a result, I think Switzerland is a pretty good model.
Yeah, no, has it helped you actually being a founder, but like in the middle of all this chaos, right? But being in Switzerland where it's like more like clean.
It's very chill. Like you can go hiking. I don't know. It's highly recommended. There's like Zug is 35,000 people, and I'd say it's a cultural center. Like Zug is like the single smallest metropolis in the world. Like great services, great infrastructure, but it's just small. And to me, honestly, please don't move to Switzerland. I picked Switzerland because there was no one else. It'd be a bad idea if all of a sudden like another 10,000 blockchain people moved there. To me, Switzerland is perfect because like, I mean, in this industry, we travel a lot. So when I'm not traveling, I like to not see that many people that I know all the time.
Yeah, same with Lisbon, right? It's like I'm in Lisbon now. It's chill, but when we actually find out how many people are based there in crypto, it's actually astonishing. Like they creep out of their houses, and it's like it's a lot of people, but they like to chill otherwise because it's so hectic out.
So the benefit of Switzerland is like there's like 15 real people. In Zug, we're like 15 real people, and generally you can walk through the city and never see anyone you know. It's great.
Good to know. Maybe for a vacation, we'll drop by. But
also, hiking is super cool.
Exactly.
I think we should just make this the general sport. We should go hiking. It's a very healthy sport. Like the first time I went hiking, there was just these couple of 70-year-old Swiss women who just like beat the crap out of us. Like hiking up Pilatus. It's like, yeah, hiking is a very healthy sport, it seems.
Indeed. Maybe we should, I should organize an event where we all go hiking to.
I'm done.
Okay. Well, as an organizer and a community builder, it's been always amazing to get to know Adrian, Awa, and Chris, and their amazing journey that they're heading towards and going into. So thank you so much for this fireside chat. It was really good to get to know you better, and stay tuned for more updates from Adrian. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Erica.
So, in case you wanna learn more about Anoma's founding story, this is actually a blog post I wrote a couple months ago. It is posted on Miro, and you can find it on my Twitter profile. It's just another perspective. This is actually written from my perspective. Adrian shared his, and maybe one day Christopher will share his. Hopefully, there's some overlap in all of them.